So we've officially come to 5 years of Classic WoW since Vanilla's launch, and 20 years of World of Warcraft celebrations are coming into sight for retail. And whilst I'm super happy with where retail WoW is at and I'm looking forward to the 20th celebration events, for Classic it seems that the path still isn't too clear where things are headed, between Cataclysm and Season of Discovery. And in times of uncertainty, people do indeed seek comfort, reflecting there is still a demand to return to the first expansion of WoW, the Burning Crusade. And generally speaking, a fair amount of time has passed since we played through BC Classic, and a return to the expansion kind of feels due at this point, potentially for the start of 2025 when people have run through Dragon Soul and Cataclysm. But whilst I'm someone who typically thinks we should get era servers for BC and Wrath at some point in the future, there are arguments to be made against going back to these expansions that make you think, is going back such a good idea? Let's take a look. Firstly, the big and common argument against era servers for BC and Wrath is that we already have too many versions of WoW available that can confuse new, returning and existing players over which version of the game to play, and as a result splits the player base even further across different versions of the game, and then drives population down for the existing versions of WoW. And I think in theory this idea holds some weight, more so in the fact that there might be confusion for new players deciding which version of WoW to play when there's so many available choices, yet I don't buy into the idea that it splits the existing player base even further, for the simple fact that you can't split players that simply cancel their subscriptions because they can't play some form of the most popular versions of Classic WoW which should be available. I mean, the amount of people that just up and cancelled their subscriptions and quit the game when Cataclysm was announced was quite interesting, and whilst we saw a resurgence in players for Season of Discovery, it hasn't quite been enough to maintain the strong player base that the original trilogy did consistently for Classic, that being Vanilla, BC and Wrath, and it's that consistency that people yearn for. So the truth is there's a lot of people in waiting. People will play seasonal game modes, or maybe even try out retail, but the home base for a lot of players does lie in either Vanilla, BC or Wrath, and a lot of dedicated players would happily cycle through these versions of WoW. Maybe even if Blizzard set up a cyclical server that changes over a 2-year period, maybe that could work, but that's a different argument. BC and Wrath era would likely be focusing on returning or existing players, and not likely new players. And once again, you can't split a player base that just quits. For myself, I really enjoy both Classic and retail WoW, but my home base at the moment is retail and I'm really enjoying it, but it's fairly sad as it's the first time since Classic's launch that I'm just not interested in what's happening there, whereas I probably would repeatedly return to BC and Wrath if they were on offer, in between whatever the latest release is for either Classic or retail. Now, a second big argument is that shortly after the release of era servers for Burning Crusade or Wrath, people would simply get bored as it's nostalgia baiting, and they'll become dead servers like Vanilla. Yet I feel this argument is a fairly hollow one, as Vanilla servers have been available for 5 years, and there is a repeated to return Vanilla almost in a cyclical nature, alongside player organised events such as Hardcore or the Fresh Server movement, and also a consistent demand for Classic, alongside the data that showed people do want to go back from Classic's original trilogy run. And you'd think that this would be enough to reflect that you could provide 2 to 3 dedicated servers, and they would be populated and would be appreciated. And as long as the servers are available, it's more about the people that will not only play it, but they will always likely come back to it, alongside community driven events to keep things alive and kicking. However, a big issue for setting up the servers would be what version of Burning Crusade or Wrath, per se, would we get, as a lot of changes were injected into them, especially Wrath, that didn't drive up much favour, and ultimately there would have to be some form of compromise from a player side to ensure the version of BC we get is a decent enough one, and it can't just be 0 changes to Burning Crusade surely, or surely not. This is the issue. What happens when the version of Burning Crusade we get isn't what certain people want, and then other people just don't turn up because it doesn't fit for them ideals and they aren't worth compromising on? Or what about when low level content starts to dry up and it's impossible to run dungeons, and the shouts for Dungeon Finder come into play? I'd want it, but do other people want it for lower levels? Does it remove the idea that you're playing Burning Crusade just for the sake of running content? A lot of issues would rise, yet I genuinely believe that as long as nothing deeply impacts gameplay, and we don't get a huge influx of WoW tokens into Burning Crusade, we'd be in for a good time regardless. Now, the biggest argument for why setting up era servers might not be such a good idea for the current time comes down to the issue of available resources the Classic WoW team has. It's no secret that Season of Discovery is a test run for something more long term in Classic WoW when it comes to expanding upon Vanilla, and the Classic WoW team has shadily said this themselves. And tie this in alongside trying to release new content for Cataclysm or potentially heading into Mists of Pandaria, it's hard to see where they'll get any extra time to delegate towards setting up and maintaining more era servers for Burning Crusade. As whilst it's easy for us to say, hey, just use some of the dead Vanilla server space for Burning Crusade and Wrath era, just turn it on, it doesn't quite work like that, and there would need to be resources delegated towards setting up and maintaining these servers in what is currently a very limited resource resource budget. And hey, potentially putting all their eggs into the basket of trying to build Classic Plus could see funding into the team to then set up these era servers. Or maybe, like I've mentioned in previous videos, they're just waiting for that low tide of content when Cataclysm is pretty much finished, and so is Season of Discovery, and they can gain some player favour by setting up Burning Crusade again, as it's likely a big bank of support they're sat on. But at this moment, it's likely a distraction that Classic WoW doesn't need, and I'd agree that there are other things that need to be sorted right now, like figuring out a long-term plan for Classic that isn't just re-releasing expansions. I think that definitely means we won't see Burning Crusade till next year at the earliest, but it's an understandable position that the Classic team is in. Overall, for me, I'd love to see some Era Realms or a Cycling Realm for Burning Crusade and Wrath set up at some point. They're expansions I will always return to, as they feel like home to me when it comes to playing WoW in general. At the moment, I'm super happy with Retail as my main base, and I'm enjoying the world within and what's to come for it. I'm not likely to dip into Classic here and there, but I've not really been interested in hardcore in Cataclysm, or really bothering to get myself hyped for Season of Discovery by this point. Being honest, some Era servers would be a huge draw for me, to start building up confidence that something is being set up for Classic WoW, whilst we wait for the inevitable announcement of a true Classic Plus at some point. But I'll always be drawn back year after year to both Outland and Northrend. What can I say? I'm clearly a sucker for the trilogy. Yet let me know what you think. Is heading back to Burning Crusade a good idea? Or is pushing forward really the way for Classic? Let me know in the comments below. But as always, take care up there, and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-ra for now. As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.